Hi everyone, welcome to my channel Bibbidi Bobbidi Books. My name is Ellie and this is going to be my October reading wrap up. So I read quite a few books in October. It was a pretty good reading month for me, and I think that's because I gravitated towards a lot of horror, which is actually a genre that is quickly becoming probably my favourite genre to read from. I always thought I was a big fantasy reader, but I've actually been loving horror this year. And yeah, obviously October is spooky season, so I was reaching for all of the spooky books and I had a great time. So I'm really excited to chat to you about everything that I read. So let's just jump straight in with the first book. So the first book that I read in October was The Last Tale of the Flower Bride by Roshani Chokshi. This is an adult gothic horror story and it follows a married couple, and he is a scholar of myths, she is heiress to a fortune, and she agrees to marry him under one condition, which is that he doesn't go prying into her past. And the bridegroom accepts this condition and marries her, and for a while it's a really happy relationship and it's almost like a fairy tale. But then the wife, Indigo, gets a message to say that her estranged aunt is unwell, and so she has to go back to her childhood home to visit her. And when they are there, her husband is seduced by the mystery that surrounds this grand estate that she grew up in, and he breaks his promise and goes delving into her dark past and uncovering some truths about her. And he finds out that she had a childhood friend called Azure, who spent a lot of time in the house, and the heart of this story is a little bit of a mystery. So he's trying to uncover what happened to this friend of hers and why his wife has never spoken of her before. And yeah, we kind of follow that story. And what I loved about this is absolutely the writing. It has a real dreamlike quality to it that really lets you become immersed within this kind of fantastical setting. I really enjoyed how much the author incorporated different fairy tales and myths into this narrative, and it just felt really whimsical. If you enjoy whimsical writing, then I do think that you will really enjoy this one. And I liked how it explored themes of grief and guilt and abuse and manipulation within a very fantastical setting. It's definitely one of those stories where you can kind of unravel the layers and look at some really interesting topics that it is discussing, and you can interpret things the way that you want to. I will say that I did guess the big twist very early on in this book, but that didn't necessarily ruin my enjoyment, because I still had a fun time kind of going along on this journey and just being wrapped in this really beautiful writing. So yeah, if you enjoy whimsy and if you enjoy gothic, then I think that you're going to really love this one. I probably should have said at the start of this video that absolutely please do check out content warnings for all of these books, because as I said, they are mostly horror, so they are all dealing with some difficult topics and things like that. So please, if you feel like you need to, make sure that you go ahead and check out content warnings for any of these books that I am talking about. I'll try and link them down below. Anyway, the next book that I read was actually a classic, which is unlike me. I don't tend to read classics, I find them a little bit intimidating. But this one is very short, so it's nice and accessible, and I've just wanted to read this one for a really long time. This is Camilla, written by Joseph Sheridan Le Fanu, and it's kind of like the original vampire story. This book has been hugely influential in vampire fiction across the years, and it actually predates Dracula by 25 years. So I find that so interesting, because everybody seems to have heard of Dracula and everyone kind of thinks of that as being kind of like the foundation for vampire fiction, but this one actually came a long time before that and probably inspired that story. So yeah, I really wanted to read it. And this one is also sapphic, it has a little bit of homoerotica in there, and it's female centric. So yeah, this is a fun little story. It's about a woman called Laura who lives in this remote chateau in the countryside, and she ends up befriending this woman called Carmilla. So Carmilla is actually in a carriage accident and she's suffering with kind of shock after this accident, and so Laura's father decides to invite her to stay with them while she's recovering from this. And shortly after she moves in, things start happening, people in the village start dying, and yeah, it's a vampire story. I'm sure you kind of know where this is going, but yeah, I enjoyed this one. I really liked some of the beautiful descriptions in this book. I didn't love it as much as I wanted to, I think just because obviously this was a very pioneering book and has been hugely influential in the genre, and for that reason I could kind of predict some of the things that were going to happen, and so it didn't really surprise me as much as I'm sure the original audience would have been surprised by. But I still had a fun time with this one and would recommend it to you, especially if you're intimidated by classics, because this one is a nice short one and I found the writing to actually be really quite accessible. So yes, I had a fun time with that. Okay, so the next book that I read was a young adult gothic romance, and that is All the Dead Lie Down by Kiri Macaulay. I was definitely drawn in by the cover of this one because I think the artwork on the front is absolutely stunning, but unfortunately I personally didn't feel like the story was as good as the cover. I feel like I was a little bit let down there, but we'll get to that. What is this actually about? This is a gothic romance and it follows a young woman who takes up this position as a nanny looking after the children of a well-renowned horror author, and she moves into this author's big grand house and is looking after her kids, and she quickly finds out that the children are kind of creepy and weird stuff is going on within the house. It's not a very original setup for a horror story, let's be honest, and I could definitely see that it was kind of drawing a lot of inspiration from things like Bly Manor, but I mean, I'm normally a sucker for that type of setup. I like a haunted house, creepy gothic setting, but this one just didn't do it for me, unfortunately, and I think it's just partly the writing style. I think I was perhaps the wrong target audience for this one because it felt quite juvenile and it just didn't do anything new. I feel like the two smaller children in this book were very cliched, and for that reason I didn't really find them creepy. I just found them kind of predictable and boring. I didn't really buy into the romance in here. I felt like we were very much told that the characters within this story had feelings for each other. We weren't really shown it in any way. I didn't feel any real chemistry between them, which is a shame. I did enjoy how our main character was struggling with issues of mental health, so it talked quite a lot about her anxiety in here, which is something that I always love to see in fiction. But it did also contain one of my pet hates, which is this idea that kind of love fixes all. It just really irks me. You know, we have this character who has a lot of difficulties that she's going through with her anxiety and her mental health, and it's just really annoying when we then see that those difficulties and those issues seem to miraculously improve when they find the right person, and I just feel like that belittles the main character, it belittles what they're going through, and it takes away their agency, and it just really frustrates me. So yeah, I really didn't enjoy that about this book, and all in all I just found it to be very predictable and quite bland. But to be fair, I do think that I wasn't the right target audience for this one, and I do think perhaps younger readers might enjoy this one a little bit more than I did. Okay, next up we have a book that I very much enjoyed, and that is A Headful of Ghosts, written by Paul Tremblay. I don't actually have the book with me because I've lent it to a friend, but I'll put a picture up for you. This was fantastic in my opinion. This is a kind of psychological horror story, and it has a fairly unoriginal setup, but I feel like Paul Tremblay delivered it to us in a really creative way that made it feel very fresh and just very compelling. So this story follows a family that are struggling financially because the husband has lost his job, and they're also struggling emotionally because their eldest daughter Marjorie is actually starting to show signs of schizophrenia. She's hearing voices, she's acting very unusually for her, and obviously that's creating quite a lot of stress and pressure on the family. And they sent Marjorie to a doctor to try and get treatment, but nothing really seems to be helping her, and her father ends up spending a lot of time at church. He seeks a lot of solace and comfort from his religion, and he becomes very close to the priest, and through discussing with him, he kind of convinces himself and his family that the best thing to do for Marjorie is to perform an exorcism, because he believes that she is actually being possessed by a demon, and that is what is causing her erratic behaviour. And so they decide to sign up for this TV show. because basically they'll get paid. So they get paid to have this filming crew come into their home and film the events leading up to this exorcism. And obviously that adds a whole other layer of stress onto this family, because they're kind of having to perform up to these cameras, but it's the only way that they can really be financially stable as a family. And you know, the parents have kind of convince themselves that this is what's best for their daughter. And yeah, we're just kind of following what happened during that time, and it's told from the perspective of the youngest daughter, who was 8 at the time, and it's retrospective, so it's actually told in interview format. So basically the younger daughter is now a grown woman, I think she's 23 or something, and she's being interviewed by a journalist about her experiences during that time when her family were going through this trauma. And yeah, what I loved about it is that, you know, we're seeing things through a really vulnerable perspective, because it kind of jumps between present day, when we have I think her name's Mary, the younger daughter, when she is talking to the journalist about her experiences, and then we also have kind of these really immersive flashbacks where we're seeing things through her eyes as an 8-year-old, and that is just such a vulnerable perspective to be in. You know, she's very, very young, she doesn't necessarily understand what's going on with her older sister, she very much idolizes her older sister, she doesn't really understand, you know, why the adults around her are acting the way they are. She's very frightened, and you're never sure if she is imagining certain things, if she's embellishing certain things, and so you're very much trying to pick out fact from fiction throughout the story, which is just something that I really enjoy. And we also get some little snippets from a blogger within the narrative, and this blogger is actually analysing the TV show that was put on during that time, and kind of looking at it from that angle, and talking about things like, you know, the creative decisions that were made when producing the TV show, and, you know, thinking about, you know, what situations might have been manipulated by the producers and things like that, which adds another interesting look at what was going on during that time. And I just thought it was fascinating. I thought the character work was done so well. You really feel close to this family, and you really see how each member of the family kind of struggles with what's going on in a very different way, and they're dealing with a lot of pressure, a lot of guilt, a lot of fear, a lot of stress, and it all, you know, escalates and has this really dramatic climax. And yeah, I just really enjoyed this one. I actually found myself to be quite emotional by some of the things that happened in this book, and really like affected by it, and I think that's just because I felt so close to this family. And for me, the horror very much comes from the situation that the family are in and the human responses to what is happening, and especially the fact that we are watching it through the eyes of an 8-year-old girl. And yeah, I just thought it was fantastic. So if you think any of that sounds interesting, please go and check it out, because I thought it was an excellent horror book. Okay, so next up we have another young adult horror, and this is Rules for Vanishing by Kate Alice Marshall. Now this is actually a book that I really enjoyed, which I was surprised by, because, you know, that other YA book that I read this month I didn't really get on with, and I feel like I've read quite a few young adult books this year that haven't really done it for me. So I was thinking that it was probably a genre that I've kind of grown out of, or, you know, that doesn't really suit my tastes anymore. But I actually ended up really enjoying this one. It had a bit of a slow start, but it really picked up. So this is a fantastical horror story, and it follows a young woman called Sarah who's trying to find her sister who went missing a year prior. And the police and her family and everyone around her think that her sister ran off with her boyfriend, and so, you know, no one's particularly worried about her or where she is. They just assume that she up and left with this kind of rogue boyfriend that she had. But our main character Sarah never really bought that narrative, and she knew that her sister was really obsessed with this urban folklore legend, which tells the tale of this mythical road that appears under very specific situations. Basically, the story is that you can have access to this road and you can travel on it if you are in the right place at the right time, if you have a key, and if you have a partner to go with you. and Sarah decides to try and find this road for herself because she's convinced that that's where her sister is, and she and a group of her friends basically go about trying to find this road and trying to follow it, and horrific things start happening. This reads very much like a fever nightmare. It's very, very bizarre, and I love it for that. Yes, I found the beginning a little bit slow, but as soon as we got to this kind of like road situation, things got really, really creative. There were some really vivid and bizarre horror scenes that I can still kind of visualize and picture really clearly, and I found it very compelling. I didn't know which way this story was going to go. I couldn't predict what was going to happen, which I loved. And I also really liked how this involved mixed media. So the story is presented in different ways. You have different evidence basically that's being presented to you. So you have text messages, you have interviews, you have video footage, and there are inconsistencies between different accounts of what happened. So you are always trying to piece together the facts and trying to figure out what actually happened. And you know, our narrator, the main character of Sarah, isn't necessarily reliable in her accounts, and it's just a really fun, twisty journey. So yeah, if you think that sounds fun, I would give it a go. Do bear in mind though that it is heavy on the fantasy, and it's one of those stories where you do kind of have to just take it with a pinch of salt and just accept that there are these strange rules that you have to abide by to get onto this mythical road. And you know, if you're someone that likes logic in their books and things that make sense and, you know, things that are watertight, then I wouldn't necessarily recommend this one for you. But if you're happy to just go along with it and just have a fun time, then I would recommend. Okay, and the final book that I actually read and finished in October was You Let Me In by Camilla Bruce. Now, I think this is definitely my favourite book of the month. I really enjoyed this one. It really surprised me actually, because I haven't heard that many people talking about this, and I picked it up on a little bit of a whim because I saw the cover and I thought it looked terrific, so I thought I'd give it a try, and I'm so glad that I did because I love this one. This is a very whimsical horror story that has an earthy aesthetic to it. It's kind of like a fae story, and we're basically following our main character, who is an eccentric woman who is a bit of a recluse. She lives out in the woods, and she's estranged from her family, and she has quite a dark past. She's got connections with some horrific things that happened in the past. So she was previously on trial for the murder of her husband, but you know, there wasn't enough evidence to convict her, and she's also been kind of tied up in this murder slash suicide of her father and her brother, and so there's a lot of bloodshed and trauma that revolves around her past essentially. And this story is basically her telling her side of the story. So it begins by letting us know that the main character went missing a year ago and is presumed dead, and in her will she has decided to give everything that she has to her nephew and niece under one condition, which is that they read this book. So they read her account of what happened, so it's kind of her telling her truth. And we find out that she sees things very differently to other people. So it talks about how throughout her childhood she could see this fae creature who had kind of bonded to her and was kind of using her to sustain himself by drinking her blood. And she has this very interesting relationship with this fae creature. You know, it's meant that she's not been able to make many friends growing up, and a lot of the things that she does and the way that she behaves to people around her are actually because of this creature that she can see. So she's actually trying to protect the people around her, but in doing so it looks like she's having challenging behaviour and being unnecessarily difficult, when in her head she is actually protecting those around her. So it's very, very interesting. It's definitely one of those where you're never sure if the main character is suffering with delusions and if she is using her imagination as a form of escapism. There's definitely heavy implications in here for child abuse and trauma, but yeah, it's so interesting because you never know quite how to interpret the narrative, and it even talks in here about her going to therapy, and our main character actually addresses the fact that her therapist thinks that she was suffering with mental illness, and you know, that's his truth. And yeah, so I just thought that it was really fascinating. It's deeply unsettling, deeply creepy, it gets under your skin, and it just has all of those kind of earthy, fey, naturey horror moments in it that I really enjoy. To me, the aesthetic of this book reminded me a little bit of Pan's Labyrinth, so if you enjoy that movie, then perhaps you might enjoy this one. It had kind of similar themes in that you've got a young protagonist who may or may not be able to see fantastical creatures, and is that metaphor for what's happening in their life, yada yada. And I don't know, there were just moments in here where I could picture things in that style of you know, the movie. Anyway, I feel like I'm not really making that much sense. This is a very, very strange book, so I feel like it's gonna be a bit of a hit or miss, so I feel like you might really enjoy it. You might just think that I'm a little bit bonkers because it is a very, very strange story, but I love stuff like that. And yeah, I just thought that it was so creepy, such an interesting character to be following, so unsettling, so imaginative, and just perfect for autumn in my opinion. So yeah, I really, really enjoyed this one. Anyway, I feel like I've been talking your ear off. I just have a couple of mentions that I wanted to talk about quickly. So I haven't actually finished these books, but I did start a couple of short story collections in October. The first is Sourdough and Other Stories by Angela Slatter. This is a book of creepy fairy tale like stories, and I have been really, really enjoying this so far, and it's been so fun to kind of dip into these as and when I feel like I fancy a little dark fairy tale. And I've also been dipping in and out of this one, which is At Home with the Horrors by Sammy Scott. So this is 14 short horror stories, and again, I've also been enjoying this one. Quite a different vibe. This one is very much dark fairy tale vibes. This one is a little bit more would we say modern horror? I don't really know how to describe it, but I've enjoyed both. And yeah, that brings me to the end of this video. I hope that I have made some kind of sense. I feel like I've rambled a little bit in this video, so yes, I hope that you've enjoyed it. Anyway, please let me know what you've read in October. I'd love to have a chat with you in the comments. Do like this video if you liked it, and subscribe if you want to see some more from me. And I guess I'll see you next time with another video. Bye!